and we're running.
Okay, good evening. So right now we are in Aalst, the Belgian city, where we are doing the 22nd edition of All This Golds. And for the first time we invited Mark Ainley, aka Solitare, on this party. So hello, thank you for coming.
Pleasure to be here.
And well, we're here to answer some questions about Goa Trance in general.
All right. So one of the things I was interested in all was, I think that, I was telling you just before, I think we all remember our first experiences with Goa Trance. I think it's a really special one. For me, it was 1994. Yours was?
1998.
Okay. And here or elsewhere?
Actually, in my hometown, Lier, I was in school, and one of the students there said like, hey, there's a trance party, you should go there. But in the end, the guy said, yeah, I'm not going there. So I went there alone, and I already knew about the music, but when I entered the location, it was wow. I mean, it was a quite big hall, full of floral decorations, freaks dancing, and immediately I fell in love. I was like, okay, this is it. I mean, before I was on a lot of other parties, and somehow it never grabbed me, and there, after 10 minutes of dancing, I knew, okay, this is it. And yeah, it struck me like lightning.
Yep, well, pretty much the same thing, which is interesting. I think, our scene seems to really have, like, people have a fanaticism, for lack of a better term. There's this emotional connection to the music and the scene and the whole sort of the Gesamtkunstwerk, as they say in Germany, sort of the totality of, the music, decoration, clothing, and everything. And for me, it was Tokyo in '94, and it was the same thing. I'd been to a number of just different parties, not trance parties per se. There was one I'd been to before, and it did strike me musically, but it didn't have the decor, it didn't have the black light. And the first time then I heard Ollie from Space Tribe. He was DJing at that time, never did live sets, and he played the whole night. And the party started at midnight, and we walked in shortly afterwards, and I went down into space, and it was just everything was alive, visually as well as sonically. And I just had the impression all of a sudden that not just I was in outer space, listening to the sounds of space, listening to the sounds inside a computer, and but also that this is where classical music was going. And so classical music is sort of what the field I've been working in and still am working in. And I thought, that musicians were always using the instruments they had at their disposal to try to communicate both their life experience on this planet and also, I think, something a little bit further. There's a lot of church music. We were talking before. We're here in a church. And there's a mass which is going to be taking place, and that these composers wrote this sort of thing, and they were trying to, I think, bridge these worlds. And there's something about this music that seems to bridge this connection with our world, where we're dancing on the ground and feeling our feet on the floor, but there's also our heads are going somewhere else and exploring.
Probably that's the thing that struck me the most, that when I entered, you step in another world, and everything is really different. I mean, the sounds, that's something you never heard before. I mean, at that time for sure. Yeah. The decoration, all this kind of stuff was unique. Also, how the people dance. Mostly it's more about seducing others or in groups or whatever. And there it was total freedom, people watching each other, even if you don't know each other. And that's different.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, there's no ulterior motive. I mean, basically you're there in the moment to have fun. And at that time, one of the things that struck me, I was actually literally not aware of a DJ. There was I never saw Ollie that night. There was this other guy who was bouncing around who was doing lighting, and he was timing the lighting in perfectly with the music. And I thought it was this whole light music sound. I thought it was all synchronized. I had no idea how it was working. But on the dance floor, it was 360 degrees. And so there was no front. And, this really speaks to, I think, in a sense, the experience of, there's which way is up in outer space, which way is up. I mean, there's no sense of, and our consciousness, we tend to always think that we're right because, we see things only from our perspective most of the time. And, when you're all of a sudden then shifting your perspective on the dance floor and, interacting with others in this way and moving around, it was a very, I think, user-based setting as opposed to this, what's starting to happen where it's, I actually heard a few of the bigger artists from the '90s recently saying that the scene has in some ways become a parody of what it was once against, where it becomes this idol worship, facing a stage. And if we have
anti-commercial, and now it's commercial. That's it.
And the thing is, I think we need to, if people want to spread the art, there needs to be some commercial enterprise behind it. But how do we do this where it doesn't actually become commercial or change the flavor? And I think, you know,
by now we failed already.
Yeah.
Well, actually, not with Goa Trance, but in Psytrance in general.
yeah, but Goa, I think Psytrance came out of Goa Trance, and then that's where the like, you see a change in the music, and one of the things that I've observed, because you know I went in at that time and it was very innocent, and I imagined, you know, before moving to London, that of course London is going to be the mecca and it's going to be amazing, and I went there and it's like, wow, this is really nothing like it, nothing like this sort of the utopia that the scene was in Japan, and you know it was the business center for this thing, and I think as soon as somebody, you know, needs to make money from it, as soon as somebody there's these other motivations that can come in, whether they're conscious or unconscious, I think it starts to pollute the water a little bit, and then it isn't as clear as it once was. And
For sure, although even I play all over the world, as you know, and I have the feeling there's always like the underground still active, and actually with awesome parties, which in my opinion are not worse than 98 or 2000 or whatever. But you have the big commercial parties as well, and somehow it seems to be splitting. For me, at least.
Yeah, I mean, I think there's always going to be now, I mean, they're the bigger parties, and so you can have, you know, these festivals of like, you know, 20, 30, 40,000 people, and it's a different kind, but it's just a different kind of experience. And so it can be amazing that you have this many people who are into the subculture and into this world. I think that in a sense, is fantastic to see, and I think it's something that everybody wanted. It's, well, you know, one of the reasons we're still working in this. We want
everybody loves it, so everybody wants to go there. That's how it works.
You know, and that's what we want, and you know, we want more people to go there. And yet, you know, how do you keep? You know, obviously every factor changes the entire equation, and so how do you get things to be bigger and then not change the energy of it? So you know, I mean, this one party of Aalst, it was probably, you know, 100 people there, maybe, and it was just, you know, I knew nothing about the music. I can't really crystallize exactly what I was hearing then, but the impression stayed with me, and there's still that flavor that stayed with me, and I think, in a sense, that there's something about that innocent time when we didn't recognize the music, we didn't know it. It was a totally virginal experience where it was like, you know, you can't, it's everything is so new.
It's like falling in love the first time.
Yeah.
Afterwards you know how it is, but
but it's still different each time with each person, right? And so each party, you know, we can fall in love with his music again, I think.
Which, you keep rediscovering music all the time. When you have a big collection, I forgot about this CD you played. Whoa, what the hell?
Well, I mean, but even that, I mean, this brings me to something that I think is really important, is, you know, still going out to parties, because when, back in '94, there wasn't so much commercially available. And so we had to go to the events in order to hear the music. And nowadays, you know, there was no internet back then. It's hard for some people to imagine life without the internet, but, you know, and GPS and all of these things, but it's also, you know, downloading and listening to sets and listening to things. I was desperate to get this music, and I had to go to the parties for it, and then slowly started getting some music and started getting some CDs, but I would still sometimes hear a track at a party, and I would ask the DJ what it was, and I realized that I had this track at home, but it sounds completely different. And I think this is one of the things why, you know, where I'm really wanting to encourage people to come to events, and I'm so glad that you guys are doing this here and have such, you know, such a dedicated following, is, you know, when you're at home, your body is bigger than the speakers. When you go out to a club, the speakers are bigger than your body, so you cannot possibly be hearing the music in the same way. And
also
so
the atmosphere influences the music.
The atmosphere completely. Well, again, every factor in an equation changes the whole equation. So it has to. And I think that, you know, some people ask me as well about uploading, you know, uploading sets, and I don't upload sets fully with unreleased music or some of the gems that I have, because I want people to have a reason to go out to an event to experience something that's unique at the event, and I don't want to then just say, well, you know, people, oh, I can just stay at home and I can listen online. I think there's this energy where people were so dedicated to go to the parties, and we have tonight, for example, some people are coming from Portugal just to come to Belgium for this party.
Are already parking or camping even in front of the location, so it's cool.
You know, so this kind of dedication, I think, you know, you're going to get something out of it when you put something into it. And for me, the online and the availability of the music is both a blessing and a curse, like anything in life. Is
it depends on how you watch it, of course.
Yeah.
Anyway, the reason why we do the parties in the end is, I think, to encourage people to have the same experience as we had the first time. And
that's exactly.
I still think we managed more or less. How many people I discovered in the years that came to me like, yeah, I still remember the first party was Oldest Gold 12 or 5 or whatever, and it's quite interesting how you influence people without even realizing that it influences their life.
No, totally. I mean, sometimes as a DJ, I mean, sometimes, you know, after a set, I mean, Sometimes we enjoyed the set. Sometimes the process of going through the set is not as enjoyable as until you hear some feedback afterwards, or you hear a recording afterwards and think, oh, actually, it was better than I thought at the time. And then, you know, you don't always hear and you don't always know how people are experiencing it when you hear that feedback. And it's, you know,
that's sometimes, yeah, as a DJ, sometimes you have a set and you're like, yeah, I'm not sure if it was my best, and people are like, wow, this was amazing. And sometimes you're like, oh yeah, this was good, and people are, yeah, I heard you play better. Sometimes it's a weird.
I know it's sometimes you can't tell.
Yeah.
And I've heard some of the big artists as well tell me afterwards, you know, was that okay? Do you think that was okay? I was like, what are you talking about? It was fantastic. I don't think that people were into it. I was like, what? I was on the dance floor, everybody was going crazy. What do you mean? And you know, and these are some of the legendary artists, right? And so then, you know, when I end up in the same situation behind the decks, it's the same kind of thing. I was like, are people really enjoying it? But
in the end, it's your own uncertainty. You what's the name in English? Project on people.
Yeah, and we don't, you know, ideally it's fun and creativity. And you know, the other thing though is back then, I think, and ideally what we do now is also in terms of what we're projecting is just enjoying the moment. And you know, one of the things that's changed a little bit for people who are really fanatical about the scene is a lot of listening. It's, oh, what's this track? And you know, trying to identify. And you know, like I said back then, I had no idea what this was. I was so busy like freaking out over like what this, you know, what these sounds were and what this all meant and what this language was, that I wasn't stopping my experience by trying to identify. And it's kind of one of the things that I wish that you know, more listeners would actually just, you know,
try to listen. That's it.
Just listen.
On the other hand, it's just the availability. People love the music, so they want to hear it again and experience it again. It's just the serotonin in your brain that wants to revive the moment. And
yeah, but then you're not actually living the moment that you're wanting to revive later on, because you're actually already tracking to the future. So I mean, you know, and this is the thing I think as well with the, you know, if we talk about revival. And where some people, I understand their perspectives about. I understand their perspectives about not, you know, maybe thinking that we need a revival. Like, why not just continue with the evolution? Because back then, I mean, the whole scene really was about like waking up in the present moment and being present. Yeah. And so, if we go back 20 years to try to like redo something that was 20 years ago, to do it new, they're saying, well, that's not. Then it's not. It will
never be the same. That's
it's never the same thing, and it isn't the same thing. But I mean, I think, and you know, I know your label and is really doing, you know, some neo. There's neo Goa as well.
Yeah. Honestly, I hate the word. Okay.
Yeah, I know. So do I. And I mean, I even the word Goa Trance. I mean, we can get into this whole thing. It's all of it's for lack of a better term. But I think that, you know, when I listen to some of the older music, there are things that were done that somehow the whole scene moved away from. And it's like, you know, I think we could still get back to either certain harmony or certain figurations or certain structures. I think it's great to revisit it without necessarily trying to recreate it. I think it's...
For me, it's more like the love for melodies that was... When I started to listen to Goa Trance, I was really into the, let's say, melodic stuff, but I mean more like harmonic stuff.
Yeah.
I love the harmonies, and this is the thing I was missing the most around 2000 and later on. And this is the reason why we started Suntrip in the end. Like, okay, instead of complaining that it's not there, let's do it yourself. And if somehow I understand, if you just recreate the same, it's boring. But I have the feeling a lot of modern artists manage to bring it to some other levels. I mean, some will probably recreate, but quite a lot, I think, want to add their own autograph to it, and I think a lot of them manage. Of course, you have to listen to an open mind, and this is quite interesting because today you have a lot of parties very old school influenced, but in the end, if you play new tracks, the old school freaks that, if you see online, hate modern music, will go crazy on modern Goa Trance, which is, I think, interesting. People should keep their eyes open. And
yeah, I'm totally in agreement. Because I mean, back then, I mean, and this is, I've heard this from, you know, Nick Doof when we were talking about the scene, and a lot, Ray Castle, and a number of other ones. Said, you know, there was no sense of, you know, you can play this, you can't play this, because they were just playing the music that they had, and they were making this journey, and they were making this story, and it hadn't hardened into this style. And I think that somehow we've started getting into this scene, like there's a quality that can emerge in the scene where people are really expecting and almost in fact demanding a certain, you know, to be satisfied. And yet, when we first went to the parties, there was no sense of not being satisfied because we weren't expecting anything. We were always, and really, I mean, expectation is one of the best ways to be dissatisfied because you know you're limiting your possibility to what it is you already know.
I think that's the saddest thing about modern Goa Trance, that it's limited. Yeah, somehow. even though you have like 10 subgenres in the end, even all of them are limited.
Yeah.
And that's sad. Some people ask me, so why do you only release like that kind of Goa Trance? The reason is very simple. We never get promos that are out of the box. That's simple. We never had any breakbeat Goa Trance, which is very crazy with a lot of acid like you had back in the days. We never had any influence Goa Trance by other genres like before. It's just, or you make Goa, or you make techno, or people are limited already at the moment they produce. And that's a sad thing about today's music, I think.
Well, and I think one of the reasons, I think when we're listening, you were talking before about the DJ projecting, and I think this is actually really an essential component of what we were hearing then, and I think what we hear with great performers now as well, that the music that we're hearing back then, and I've spoken to several producers about this from then, and they all agree with me, that we're not just listening to the music they were creating, they were experimenting. And they didn't know what they were doing, and they were curious and saying, what's going to happen if I twiddle this knob, and what's going to happen if I do this? And so in a sense, some of what we're hearing is the experimentation and the spontaneity and the fact that they didn't know, and they didn't exactly they hadn't hardened on the techniques or their style and so on. So we're listening to this creativity.
Sound experiments, literally.
Yeah, so there's this experimentation. So when we listen to the old music, of course, there's beautiful melodies, there's all of this great stuff that's musical in the music, but I think the energy of it is really about the fact that there was this spontaneity and there was this creativity. And I spoke to one artist recently, and he said, if you listen to our music, you're going to hear, and this year was when we had we decided in a sense what our style was, and we were looking towards the future. And he's like, and you can hear the change in our music. And so, the fact that they can recognize that as well, I think this is something that started to happen in the scene where we got comfortable.
Yeah. But you play modern music as well, huh? How do you think modern music is, if you compare it to the old music? I mean, you still think the creativity is there?
There is. You have to look for it. I mean, like anything, there's a double-edged sword. Like for me, I listen to some of the old stuff, and some of it I like, and some of the stuff I used to like, I'm like, it's a little bit basic, and the melodies weren't as great. I'm not as worried about the engineering of some of the old tracks. Some people really worry about that. For me, it's the sound quality is more about the harmonies and melodies. Look, I mean, there's a lot of people complaining about, the 16th note bass line, the sort of the galloping bass, the dum-da-da-dum-da-da-dum. It's a bass line, it's there, it can work, you can make it work, you can get tracks with variety. I mean, for me, what I have to do if I'm going to craft a 90-minute set, which, is actually a long set these days, because for some reason there's this thing towards 1 hour sets, which drives me crazy.
At least 2 hours, 2.5.
2.5, yeah, so here's there's going to be a journey. And with retro stuff, there's no worry about that. But, when you're, for an hour and a half, I mean, I'm not going to I'm going to do a maximum really like 3 tracks of a similar style before I start going into something else and start evolving it. And we were talking before about, some artists. I mean, there are, in the ways that, back in the 90s, we could recognize instantly a hallucinogen track, a doof track, Total Eclipse track, even though there were differences. Like with Total Eclipse is one of the most varied. I mean, you hear like all these different flavors that they did, this rock kind of thing, and a little bit more nasal and mystical and mourning, or all this kind of stuff. You could still tell it was them. And I think now there still are artists who have their signature, and the ones who are unfortunately maybe using all of the same presets on Logic, and then they end up sounding too much the same and structuring their tracks the same. I'm not going to play as many of them, but I'll have the selection, and I might play 2 or 3 as one section of the set, but I have to look for somebody who's really doing something harmonic or something with their flavor, and there still are artists out there who I think have this kind of individuality and who are expressing themselves, and they have their sound, and then if you put them in a set with all these other artists who have their sound, then it becomes more of that symphonic kind of orchestral set that we had back in the 90s.
I think maybe I'm based, but when you have a label, I think you always think you have the unique artists, but the interesting thing with today's Goa Trance is that a lot of the artists are working analog again, which is very interesting to play with the old tracks, because in the end, okay, the sound quality is a little bit different, but not that much in the end, and you can really combine them, I think, and have very interesting results with, let's say, new results than in the past.
Yeah, I mean, I think that one of the things, of course, there's always great things toward in evolution, and there's always things where we might wish that things went differently. And so the sound quality is fantastic. What people are able to produce now, the technology is great. And one of the things that I think they're doing is the sound is a little too clean, because when you do it on the computer and you repeat a note, if you're doing it manually on a synthesizer, the note is not hit exactly in time, not exactly at the same level. But if you try to cut all of these things off, you're lacking the flow that there is in nature, where there's no straight lines. And I think it's some of this.
Mechanical.
It's too mechanical, and the music is already mathematical. So when it has this slightly organic flavor that there is, where it's this irony that I used to experience in the outdoor parties, where I thought, okay, we're here in nature, listening to something electronic. And so it was this incredible superimposition where I thought it's like we're listening to there's the technology, like nature is a kind of technology, and you look at flowers and you see fractals, and you look at like how the whole ecosystem and everything exists, right? I mean, science is mathematical, and it's, and nature is built on that. And so, of course, we want, there is that in the music, but when there's that little bit of, imperfection, which is
more perfect.
It makes it more perfect, and it's like in Greek statues and Islamic the carpets, they always put in a flaw, because they say it's nothing human should be too perfect. And I think that this is also one of the things where people are listening a little too much to make sure the DJ mixes everything perfect. It's like, what? We weren't even paying attention back then. We had no idea. We were just so in the moment, and there was that perfection of being in the moment. And so...
No, it's interesting what you say, because I know a lot of old artists that said some of their experiments that were wrong in the end were perfect, because they used, let's say, wrong acid lines, and at once they sounded awesome. And
yeah. I mean, and a lot of them, I mean, it's, you listen to some of the stuff, it's like, oh, I didn't think that was very good. And then all of a sudden, 20 years later, well, I can't say. But, they listen to it 20 years later, it's like, oh, And in the case of Doof, with the Destination Bomb alternate mix, which I, finally got my hands on 17 years after he lent me the DAT when it was playing at a party, he was like, oh, I don't know why that one didn't come out, because I actually like that one better than the one that was released. And, these things happen. And so, with the archaeological work that we're doing, with Suntrip and with DAT is kind of, to get some of the stuff out, as well as to focus on, newer stars who are, propagating this kind of mindset through the music, I think is important.
I think, it's funny that you name it, because a few days ago I was talking to Tsuyoshi, and he was like, the archaeologist is here.
Yeah,
I am, of course. I mean, I studied it, but still, as a music archaeologist, it's super interesting to keep on digging forever. And even if people think everything has been discovered, it's not.
No.
We keep finding new stuff. It's crazy.
No, I know, and this is the same thing that I'm going through. I mean, and literally in preparation for this party, I was digging through my archive, and I was like, oh, I transferred that. Really, I forgot about that. And so there's going to be a couple tonight that I forgot that I had, from some of our beloved artists as well. So it's there is stuff, and on the topic of unreleased things, just because it's unreleased doesn't mean it's great. Sometimes it was not released because it wasn't as good as the other ones. This Doof one happens
Today,
to be
some
an
people
exception.
are too obsessed about it.
I think they're too obsessed about it. I think the experience, the focus on it is, and this is something I discussed with Ollie, and why he, is really into the new music as opposed to doing retro, is, giving somebody a brand new experience they've never had before. And if you have the music that nobody has, then you're giving them a completely spontaneous experience that's unrepeatable. And it's, and I absolutely agree with that. And, I'm not going to play a track just because it's released, or force it into a set because it's unreleased. There's stuff that I just dug out of my archive, and I really was thinking to play this tonight, and I'm like, I'm not sure if it's going to fit in where, the time slot that I'm given, and where it's going to go, and in terms of BPM or in terms of mood. And I'm not going to force the story just to do that. And I think, having this bigger picture of, what's really going to work, and what's in the best is important. So you can play an amazing set with just released tracks,
For sure.
and you can make them sound completely different with creative mixing and the storyline.
Also, if you dig deep enough, nobody will know. Even the freaks will be like, what was this track? Some vinyl, some this, some that.
Exactly. And even the released ones, I was discussing with Chris the other day that, the first track on the Dragonfly Order Odonata CD is Graham Wood with Danny Dawson, who I never heard of before. I've never heard that played out. I've never heard anybody play this track, and it's like the first track on the first CD that I bought, and I've never heard it played at a party. And so, there's plenty of room for this.
That's for sure. You're right. Most Goa Trance DJs play more or less the same 2,000 tracks. That's an issue. Yeah. Although I think internet gives us great possibilities with this, because you have a lot of Facebook groups who are really concentrating on only wear stuff, so people get to discover a lot of special things, which in the end broaden the possibilities for a lot of new guys in the scene, because we are lucky because we were grown up with this. We know all the old music, and everything we discover now is like on top of that.
Yeah.
And imagine you are new in the scene today and you want to discover the old music. It's a task of 10 years.
It's almost overwhelming.
It's too much. Yeah.
No, and there's stuff that, I mean, you know, people, you know, I'm an archaeologist as well, and I'm as kind of a historian of the scene, and there's tons of blind spots and gaps in stuff, because of course we're all drawn towards what we like, and this is why we would have a different DJ at a party than another one, because they're going to bring something personal and their own flavor and their own likes and their own thing and sculpt their own set. So, you know, this is ideally, I would just love for us to get back to, I think, the variety, just in terms of the music, in terms of DJs, you know, of course, playing for more than an hour and playing a variety of music, you know, like we do over here and in these parties. So, and get back. I think that's the thing of getting the energy of what it is that we're experiencing, what the scene came out of, as opposed to necessarily the form. I don't think it has to be in the same shape, although of course we don't need to recreate the wheel.
People dance different, people clothes different, everything is different already anyway. If you see the old movies, you're always like, ooh, look those clothes, ooh.
I know.
But yeah.
You know, but I mean, you know, and then things come and things go, and yet, you know, there's something in the scene that I think is still going. I think there's
the energy, that's it.
Yeah.
The positive energy, the vibration of people that want to have fun on our, let's say, deeper level.
Yeah.
They connect to the music on another way, I think. I mean, trance music is not about, well, for many people it's just about having fun, but for some people it's a deeper experience.
Yeah. Well, it was
for me, at least, Goa Trance is more suitable for this than a lot of the modern music, but I can imagine some people have it on high tech too.
Oh, well, yeah.
I guess, I hope.
Possibly. Again, you know, coming from a classical background, I'm still a bit of a musical snob, and so I really consider that, you know, what it is we've got in the scene, you know, it does have more of that flavor, and I think it is still really working. So, so I'm looking forward to tonight and experiencing this great party here and having a chance to play for you guys.
Well, I'm sure you will make some videos so people will see how it went.
Yeah, hope so. Hopefully somebody else will as well, because I hope to be on the dance floor dancing for
we'll
a
make
little
sure
bit of my
that
set too.
Cool.
Awesome.
Okay.
All right. Thanks very much.
You guys.
See you guys.